All right. Well, first of all, thank you everyone for joining us at our second semi-meeting. We had a lot of really wonderful talks throughout the day, and hopefully this panel can kind of be like a nice summary and discussion of some of the topics we discussed today. I'd like to reintroduce our panelists for this evening. First, we have Ikumi Kayama, who is the founder of Studio Kayama, and Sam Bond is next to her. She's a faculty member at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and she teaches interactive and game design. And Amanda Behr, who is the program director and faculty at Augusta University and a practicing anaplasologist. So many of our talks today have sort of issued questions about how we can improve the way we think about and implement medical illustration. The panel will hopefully add to that conversation. We'll be talking about existing technologies, new technology, and the identity of the field of medical illustration as a whole. So I'd like to get started with a question that we've all sort of thought about or tackled before as a group, and that is, does the title of illustrator really apply to our day-to-day work anymore?
I'll start. Okay, so I'm definitely a medical illustrator. I make illustrations that are medical, but I'm okay being called an artist because that's what I am too. And I don't know, it's always kind of interesting, like what you perceive yourself is not what like other people perceive you as. So I'm just trying to be more I try to be flexible, and if I'm able to offer what they're looking for, then I think I've done my job. So I'm not too concerned about like my titles, as long as I'm like a good, I'm being part of the team and able to contribute to the greater good.
So this is a really interesting question, because when I first got out of graduate school and I first entered the field, I wanted to do game development, I wanted to do interactive and VR design, and I was determined to call myself a medical illustrator. And I was determined for everyone else to think that a medical illustrator can do all of these things, and we can. But that doesn't necessarily mean that anyone knows who I am or what I'm talking about when I introduce myself as a medical illustrator. I'm one of the board members for the International Game Developers Association in Chicago, and I remember it was after 5 times in one evening where I introduced myself as a medical illustrator, and they said, well, you also make games though, right? And I had to explain, I had to give my spiel about how, well, illustrators can also do this and this. And I kind of had to come to terms with the fact that we can't wait for the world to change around us and understand who we are. I kind of have to tailor who I am or who I introduce myself as to the person that I'm talking to the client, to the people who are working with me, because I need to get them to understand what I do and get to the point of the conversation faster than just here's, who I am,
I agree with both of them. I think really the way that I describe what I do depends on who I'm speaking to. And so for me, my primary creative role is medical sculptor, but I'm a creative thinker and I'm part of a team. And so I think that's what we bring as professionals. And so that's the words that we use are less important than what we bring to the table. We have debated this as an organization, the Association of Medical Illustrators, and I believe the AMI's solution was to create the tagline, illuminating the science of life whenever we look at our profession. And so our role is broad, but very needed part of a team. And you just adjust as you need to help educate your audience, whether it be a collaborator or someone who's never been part of what a medical illustrator can do.
Right, and I think that's, oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, all right. Yeah.
Logistics.
And to kind of like sum all that up, I think it's really interesting because as a field we do so many things, but we're so small. So finding one word to kind of describe the plethora of hats we wear any given day it's very tricky, and I think it can lead to a lot of sort of reflection and identity questions. But going along with that, how do we think that emerging technologies, do they affect our role as illustrator? Do they change our role as things like change and improve?
Okay. I think that bounces off what I was saying. We really come to the table as creative problem solvers. And so regardless of the technology or the tool that we're going to use, we still bring to the table those skills of storytelling and design. And so the tools are always going to change. They're always going to adapt. I think being aware of where technology is going is so important. So we as a profession or we as individuals can adapt to the tools that are out there and the needs of your client. And I think it really comes down to the needs of your client.
I totally agree with that. Yeah, I think, you know, what we do as illustrators can often just depend on the meaning and the impact of the job that we're doing. Like 3 years ago, I would never have called myself a VR developer potentially, or maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but you know, then a year after I would say that, I was developing like a whiplash patient game that was basically just VR duck hunt. So you never really know what you're going to be doing. It's about what's most meaningful to the client, what's most meaningful and impactful to the patient.
Yes, I totally agree with you. It's like we're all coming to an agreement. But yeah, I don't worry too much about what I use as long as I'm able to show that, like, what is my value? Is it the fact that I can, you know, use Photoshop or I can use Maya? It's not so much that. It's like, can I, you know, like understand this scientific information, process it, filter it, and like, you know, give it back and for the appropriate target audience, and will it do its job? Like, how would it impact the viewers? Like, that's actually like the gist of that. So I think like what we use is kind of like icing on the cake almost. So like, if you think of medical illustration as a cupcake, I think like the tools will be the icing and the sprinkles, and then like our brains and our creativity will be our cake, right?
Sounds delicious. So as we all know, technology is never going to stop improving or changing or growing or existing. So what are some steps we should take when we want to learn a new piece of technology?
I will say like work without a deadline or the objective. So I just want to like just throw myself in there and see what I can do or see what I can't do. And just, you know, I'll just be like, okay, I'll just give myself an hour to play with this and see what happens, really. Like, I won't try to, like, one time I tried to make a dolphin out of 3D. I made, like, a naked mole rat. So, like, I can make a naked mole rat, but not a dolphin. Like, so it's just like that. Like, don't let that stop you, I guess. It's always, like, make your mistakes early so you know how to solve them later when it's, like, the time is of essence.
I totally agree with that. We're gonna be saying that sentence a lot, I think. I think one of the things with emerging technology and learning new skills for me is that I really have two things that I do when I want to learn a new skill. The first thing is ask other people their experience with it. So I go to the AMI hub, I ask my friends, I text them and say, hey, have you done this before? I haven't done this before, but I want to do this thing. And then the next thing I do is I make myself do it. Like you said, without a deadline, without stakes in the process, I try to do it on my own. So every year I give myself one project that has no client that I just want to do for myself. That's how I've made a card game. It's how I made a game called Murmur Spree. It's all about kind of challenging and pushing yourself. But the kind of downfall with that is, what if you want to try getting into VR? Can you afford a like $600 VR setup just to play around and see if you like it? Probably not. So you really have to think about, how are you going to train yourself to try new things with the enormous expense that might come with new technologies? And some of that is also looking into just local resources.
And not to repeat exactly what they said, because I think that's my experience as well, just finding a project and going for it. Another way that I learn and these skills sink in is also being able to teach those skills to others. If you're learning a new tool, there's no reason why you can't take your experience and then teach it at an AMI workshop or give a presentation about your experience. And I find that gives you a deeper, more understanding and appreciation for that particular skill. And it helps you prioritize, did I really like this? What was my experience with it? Was it positive? Was it negative? What are the pros and cons, like lasers in the jungle? Having that list is helpful to my understanding of new technology.
All right, which that's a great segue, actually. So speaking of teaching, how are the graduate programs kind of adjusting to better help students prepare entering a field that's almost always changing within a couple years?
Well, I can speak from my experience, and I imagine it's very similar. I see the amount of software that students are exposed to in the program is incredible. And so, again, it kind of goes back to what the ultimate tool is. They are basically trained to learn how to learn. That's one of the greatest skills that we seek whenever students are coming in. We want someone that's going to be a lifelong learner. And so if you're a lifelong learner, you are going to be one that's seeking out new technology, a new way to do something. And so those are the skills, and then all the foundational skills of solving the problem with the right technology.
You put it so well, of that, as teachers, we have to teach students how to teach themselves. And I think, I know from my own experience, my own teaching methods, I actually picked up a lot of stuff from Jean and from Allison, kind of having to find the delicate line between observing students, letting them fail a little bit, and then finding the moment where you can step in and guide them back in the right direction, figuring out a way to kind of Mr. Miyagi your student population. But part of it is, too, that, making sure that your students are in a good, healthy mental health space is very, very, very important to the classroom right now. And so part of it, too, is making sure that they have the resources and the support and the guidance to be willing to experiment and be willing to fail in the classroom.
Oh, dang. So I'm going to have a different answer because I don't work at a graduate program. But when I do teach classes, I get asked to teach like a watercolor class or a painting class, and I'll put together like a little class worksheet. And it kind of boils down to the same thing every time, maybe because I'm just a boring teacher, or maybe there's just like very like singular ideas you want to cover in art. Is like, are your values correct? Are your is it clear like what you want to show? Is it clear, or is it like, what is the intention? What do you want to get the feel? Like, what's the feeling? So like when I teach, like that's like the kind of the basics of art that then they can like use to kind of like go from there. So that's what I do.
So moving a little bit beyond technology, as people have more and more access to information, society as a whole is becoming a little bit more socially aware. So what can we do within our field to better promote diversity and diverse thoughts, and both within our work and then within the workplace itself?
Okay, so I work a lot with scientists, and women scientists is like really hot right now. Not that like they weren't there before, but now we're like, oh, okay, so it's a thing. And so like I like to do that, and I sometimes get guff for being a girl in like this the professional setting. So I like to just kind of bring that up there, and not be confrontational. Like if something like that happens, if it's for my ethnic background, or if my being a woman or whatever. So I just kind of suggest that you might want to look into this, hint hint, wink wink, nudge nudge. So that's what I do to just kind of get everybody not up to speed, closer to speed, to the correctness of or to be more diverse and inclusive in the work environment.
I think that within our field, diversity is actually kind of three-pronged. We have inclusivity, which is very important. It's kind of allowing underrepresented groups to have a voice and stepping back when you don't need to be the speaker, right? Part of it is representation. Is your work representing all populations, or is it just representing the majority? And then one of the last ones, one of the most important ones for interactive work in particular, is accessibility. Is your work accessible to everyone that can see it? And that's a huge thing with web standards, but it's also getting more and more common in VR. Does your audience, can you rely on them to have use of both of their hands, or do you need to come up with ways in your interactive program to allow everyone to access all of the functions you're making? So I think we have to look at it from that big, broad perspective as well.
So I think just in agreement with my colleagues here, the works that we create we can include diversity. And I think that's, we're becoming more and more aware of that standard normal man isn't necessarily always the best option for that particular patient audience or that particular publication. And so being aware of how we represent our work is important. But also, I think contributing to diversity, we can also consider as a group mentorship and how mentorship may play a role in getting individuals into the field and also making sure they feel welcome. So that's something for us to think about as a group. And if you are part of a diverse population, how you might want to contribute to that aim.
So I worked on this really cool project for blind students, and I actually worked with a researcher who was blind, and it was like the, no pun intended, most eye-opening drawing session I had with that professor, because like he was like, draw a heart. So I drew a heart, and he's like, well, how do I know which side's up? I was like, I don't know. That's a really good question, because he's like, well, you know, it could be a butt too. Like, how do you know that? And I'm like, that's a really good point. And he then brought up that most Braille design is designed by sighted people. So if you think about it, like if you see a big map, like how are you going to know if you can't see where the Braille is? It's always usually off to the side, a little lower, like, but the human height, it's not at the natural human height usually. So it's just that, like, just even like thinking about that, and I thought, like, I kind of felt embarrassed because I was like, oh, I'm a visual specialist, and then I didn't even think about there are people that don't see that still need to learn stuff. So it's just like always like really cool to be able to like have that sort of like, I don't know what's the opportunity, like as like medical or visual specialists to kind of like even like consider things of like what to do when people don't see. And that's part of inclusivity as well, so.
For sure, there's a lot of design we have to keep in mind when we're creating work for non-able or not normal abled people, especially with sight or color deficiencies, stuff like that. And I think we sort of covered this a little bit, but what's our role or responsibility as the artist, the person sort of coming up with the initial ideas in promoting or in taking into account diversity from our end to the client?
Are we talking still about diversity?
Yes. Sorry. What's our individual role and responsibility as the artist, as the person coming up with the concept to include it in our work?
So when I work on the team with scientists or surgeons or ornithologists, and I find ornithologists to be the most tricky, is that they're like, well, you're the artist, you know what you're drawing. Like, we can help you with the science because that's what we do. We're word people. We're like more interested in labels sometimes than the actual drawing. But like you're in charge of the drawing. So I kind of go and try to find a group that would be like that, have that kind of openness. And as a freelancer, I have that decision to like work with this group or not. So that's really nice that I've been really fortunate to be able to just like tell the clients up front that like this is my specialty and this is what I can bring to the table, and this is where I fit. Like, are you gonna can you fit me? And usually they're like, oh yeah, of course, because even like they're like, oh, the artists like sometimes see the scientists never look at, because we're like kind of looking at the thing as a whole, whereas scientists are like looking at like A, B, C, D, E. Like they have like very specific things to look at. But I'm like stepping back, like, did you ever notice that this is always this shape? And they're like, what's happening? And and then like things can like spiral out of control from there too. So like that's I think that's really cool as an illustrator, and like, hey, I contributed to science maybe.
So I think with this question, a lot of it comes down to storytelling and perspective. And so when you're originally kind of offered a job, one of the things that you want to be asking, one of the first questions is, who is my audience? And at the end of the project, if you have a bunch of images of the same looking person, a lot of what you're essentially saying is, this is my audience, and this is my only audience. And we need to be thinking much more about who we're including in our representation and what it's saying about who our intended audience is, and whether we're accidentally or intentionally being exclusive to people by not understanding the perspectives of who our audience actually is.
I don't have much to add to that other than what I've said before. Just bring that perspective to the table if it's an option, and again, knowing your audience.
Yeah, that's great. And shifting gears like a little bit, I know almost all of us have maybe an Instagram or a Twitter or some sort of social media presence, but what is, as an illustrator, as an artist, as a working individual, is there an essential value versus risk into having a social media presence, into promoting our work online, putting our work out there?
Yes. So I see value and I see risk. So I think we have to protect ourselves as intellectual property holders whenever we can. So don't forget those copyright notices, even for Instagram. But I think there's a lot to be gained in social media, Instagram and the like, for networking. I wouldn't say, my personal experience is not to freelance, so I'll allow my colleagues to address that. But I meet so many people and get so much inspiration from Instagram, and conversations spark. I mean, I had someone from Iran contact me recently because of some stuff I'd put on one of my Instagram accounts. So you can get unique perspectives from social media, and just be aware of what you're putting out there and how to protect it. What are ways you may protect it?
I think it's a really interesting question because I've seen students get jobs because they were, found on Instagram, they were found on social media. But at the same time, you are essentially introducing yourself to the world without the opportunity to know what your first impression is really kind of being perceived as, you know what I mean? So it is kind of a big risk because you're not there with everyone who sees what you're putting out into the world to kind of explain yourself. But I think it's interesting too because like in other fields like the games industry, I asked kind of a similar question to somebody who'd been developing a game, and he had mentioned that someone had asked him a question of, you put all these videos of your games out on Instagram, aren't you worried someone's gonna steal your idea? And his response was essentially, even if he stole my idea, he'd be 1.5 years behind me. So I think some of it is about what we're sharing, how far along in the process we are, and what the original purpose and the intent is of us going to social media in the first place.
That's a good point, what Sam said about what is the intent. So I would just first consider what am I using social media for? Is it just for fun, or am I trying to show my artwork off to get jobs, or am I trying to get paid? Because if you think about it, those are three very different goals with separate steps to get to that goal, if that makes sense, right? So I still haven't quite figured out how to get a paying client from social media. So I just get likes, but I can't eat that, I can live off it. So what do just trying to do some trial and error and see what can I do to turn these likes into paying clients. So that's a work in progress. But I see value in the fact that you're just kind of getting yourself out there and showing what you can do, because what you put is not necessarily what people are looking for to just steal, but just to be ooh, I like this, middle cerebral artery. I wonder if I can hire her to do femoral artery. I don't know, but it's like that. And I lost my train of thought. But well, anyway, so so there's that of showing what you can do, to then suggest well, we can work together and do something else too. And I think that will be a really cool tool to use for social media.
Kind of going off of that, an easier question, do you guys have a preferred platform you use, or have you found a different use for using different platforms throughout your work?
So I find that different social media platforms have very different personalities or kind of people that like to hang out. So I find that science writers and researchers are on Twitter a lot. And they're always talking about new dinosaur species discovered. That's on Twitter. Or and then Instagram is as you know, it's more art and visual oriented. So if I were like formally investigating social media, if I want to go meet science writers that I can collaborate with, then I'll go to Twitter. If I'm trying to get inspiration, or if I'm trying to find artistic collaborators, I'll go to Instagram. And that will be like how I would use it. Just kind of like, don't do everything because that's overwhelming, but just kind of be like choosy and like focus on what you want to do to like kind of keep yourself on track.
I think, unfortunately for me, the answer is I kind of hate all of them. It's not because of the platform, though. It's because of me. I am doing something wrong with them. Like with Instagram, I'll get a bunch of followers in the board games industry because I'll post stuff about that. Then the next day I'm like, but I really want to post about my buffalo chicken dip, and it doesn't really make sense for my audience, right? And then with Twitter, it requires so much upkeep because they will punish you with the analytics if you are not tweeting every day. So some of it is about who is your audience? What is your intention with how often you are tweeting, how often you are posting? Do you understand the analytics of the platform you're using? There's a lot that can go into it. But I think the key is to find one that meshes with you, which I am still working on, and really utilize it to your best ability with all of the knowledge that's out there.
My favorite's Instagram because it's so visual. I mean, I just enjoy that. And I do have separate accounts, one for my medical side and one for my fine art side. So that's how I balance the desire to put buffalo chicken dip out versus the medical. Maybe you just need a food version. And that's just because, I mean, just as Ikumi said, I had to limit. I mean, I can't do it all, and so Instagram is the one that I find the most value in because of the inspiration out there and the connections. I mean, going back to that, being able to see what my colleagues in the AMI are doing, my colleagues in the pottery world are doing, I just enjoyed that platform personally.
Yep, yeah, go ahead.
So sometimes I use Hootsuite, if you've used that before. Yeah, any hands? Hootsuite. What? Really? You know, Sam. Sam, you know.
Well, okay, so I have been doing the AMI's Twitter for the past 2 years, so I get Twitter. I just don't get it for me.
Right, so Hootsuite is a platform where you can like select up to 3 social media streams for free to like post all at once, or you can schedule them at certain times. So what I did with my Inktober was like, okay, I drew a catbird today, so I would schedule one for Instagram, schedule one for Facebook, and schedule one for Twitter. I'm sorry, I schedule one for LinkedIn. And it's just kind of like throwing pasta on the wall and see which one sticks. And it's like incredible, like the responses to like different platforms is like different each time. And I have like no idea why. Like LinkedIn loves catbirds, but they hate like gulls. Like I don't know like why that is. Like I love to figure out like what's happening.
So speaking a little bit more broadly about our field as a whole, is there something we should be doing to kind of get the name of medical illustration more out there? Should we be doing something more to promote our field as a whole?
I think we can dig a little deeper than the surface level right now because like I think there are so many great talks today about like, oh, you never thought about this as a problem, but this is a huge problem, and like we can like fit right in and like help solve this problem. So it's kind of like I'm sorry to keep bringing up the natural history stuff, but like Smithsonian is like really big and famous, right? So everybody tries to go to the Smithsonian to get projects. And the researcher's like, gosh, there's like 20 million illustrator requests for each like beetle discovery. So they kind of get used to like paying like very little for the research, like for the illustrations, or even like free illustrations. And I kind of got tired of that. So I went to US Fish and Wildlife, and they're like, oh my goodness, like this is like not as famous as the Smithsonian, but they're like, wow, there's like an illustrator for this. So it's just like, if you like dig a little bit deeper, like just under the surface level, to do a little bit more research and see where you may fit. Like that's the way to like just really like be really appreciated, because like there's nothing worse than like, you know, like you like work your heart out and then like you don't get like the amount of appreciation you think you deserve for a project, right?
So I think part of it is that as medical illustrators, you know, we're a niche field. We're very, very niche, right? We have the sciences, we have the arts, and because of that, if we have a question, often it's easiest to look to each other because we have so much very specific to us expertise that's very, very helpful. But often that can lead to us getting very internal, looking only to each other, not looking to other people outside of our tiny field for expertise. So turning to other people in other fields for help, I think would really, really open a lot of us up to new opportunities, to getting people to know who we are. As much as we're learning from them, they can learn from us too.
Does this go back to the name thing? I mean,
It's all around.
could it be? Yeah, perhaps something we could do is, I mean, we speak to each other, but what about speaking to other professions at their professional meetings? Not sure who takes that call upon themselves, but yeah.
Ikumi's going to go to all of them.
Do it. So, and Deb is going to do it.
When I was on the board, we actually did reach out to a number of associations. I went and I spoke, and I believe Tanya Hines also spoke to the American Medical Writers Association. And I even enlisted other members because I thought, you know, I'm one of these people, I'd like to pull as many people in because I think it's important. We're such a diverse field. If you get an invite, think of somebody who is in our field that does something in the field that's different. So, for instance, I reached out to Delilah Trump, who does straight medical illustration. What that did was it allowed us to talk about also the psychology of what we're doing about when we're actually creating medical illustration and graphics. So we are presenting something from an educational nature and why medical writers should actually be looking to us to help them elicit something visual. So there are these opportunities. The other thing is the AMI does provide canned talks. You don't have to build these PowerPoints by your lonesome, you know? When I go out and talk, I don't talk about Deb Haynes, medical illustrator, I do veterinary medicine. I talk about the AMI and what a cool group of people we are and how multi-talented we are. So we need to think broader about our profession, and when we do that, people will come to you. You just got to say hi, you know?
Yeah. Thanks, Deb.
So we do have some questions from people that we've collected over the last day or two. So the first one is, can you share one remarkable emerging technology or experience you've had in the last year?
I mean, this meeting, could we? You know, I think it is important to think about your professional development. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir right now, but everybody is here. We're trying to learn what's new. And I just enjoy coming to these meetings and learning about new technologies. But in my role as a professor, I also get exposed to ideas of our students and what they bring to the table. And so I would say that being able to see my students developing their projects and finding new technology, to me that's a valuable experience, but hard to duplicate. So these meetings are just such a valuable tool.
I think a lot of the work that's being done with photogrammetry, with virtual reality, with mixed reality and augmented reality, a lot of that stuff is incredible. A lot of us kind of know at least the tip of the iceberg about what's coming. Right now I'm pursuing a PhD in rehabilitation sciences, and some of the most amazing technology that I've been seeing has been coming from technology that is being used to take patient vitals. So we're trying to figure out, you know, how do you put a VR headset on someone who also has an exercise testing mask on without making them feel like RoboCop? Like, it's a difficult situation. So you have to think about the technologies that are also emerging in clinical practice and not just in the techniques that we're making, how we can apply those together. But as far as the coolest things that I'm seeing, multiplayer VR, when I first saw it a few years ago, I saw the most hilarious thing of two people running into each other. And it was, I think I laughed for like 5 days. So now it's awesome, and it's very, very interesting.
I think I may have like started traveling back in time. Like more, I was like, oh, I should probably do more pen and ink and watercolor. Is like, but now like there's a lot of like different ways to share the group. So like of course there's YouTube videos, but there's also a thing called Twitch, I think, that people just like paint, and you're like, wow, you can like watch people paint in watercolor on TV, and it's just that's kind of cool because I learned like we all learn so much from just like seeing someone else do the exact same thing you're trying to do, but like they do a little bit differently, and then like that's like really cool way to learn. So that's kind of the mind-blowing
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. Artists on Twitch are definitely like such a large part of that platform. So the next one is, what are the greatest threats to our profession over the next 10 years? Yeah, the next decade.
I can give it a go. I think one of the biggest threats to us is ourselves. If we are exclusionary, if we are not keeping up with different techniques, if we are trying to stay stuck in the past, we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot. If we're not introducing ourselves to new groups, if we're not opening ourselves up, it's the same situation that we're going to see just looping over and over again. We have to open our eyes to who else is out there doing amazing stuff and not be exclusive to ourselves. That's, I think, one of the biggest threats to our association, is really just us not really being aware of everyone else that could be working with us and collaborating with us.
Agreed. I will say probably along the lines of copyright and just being aware of where your works go, and protecting them, and knowing, being aware of legislation as it evolves, and that could be a potential threat. But I think that's been the case for years. But I think it goes back to our social media conversation. But how do you protect yourself? Just those baseline elements.
You want to say something else, Ikumi, or? Just the robots. So next question is, some roles in large organizations are outsourced while others are valued full-timers. How can medical illustrators position our profession to be the latter?
Be the creative problem solver at the table. So regardless of what your skill set is, if you come to the table with solutions, creative solutions, I think you can change with the field. You can change with the technology. So I think that's the important thing, because at a master's degree level, you have those skills to lead a team and be at the table with other professionals. So keep that in mind and promote yourself in that way. It's so important to not undervalue yourself. And I see myself as an artist, but you don't want to be seen as just the artist. And I will say that some teams value that, but you're a professional.
I think that's a really good question. I think part of it for me, having worked, I've worked in a physical therapy department for a long time, and a part of explaining to people my role wasn't necessarily saying, look, I made this thing, it's great. A lot of it was talking with them, kind of interpreting what they're saying, communicating it back to them, and then giving them ideas based on what they're telling me. And sometimes too, it's taking a third role, so having the engineer that we're also working with. I'm communicating with them, I'm kind of translating what they're saying to the physical therapist and going back and forth. So I'm planting myself as a person of value in that conversation because I kind of understand all of the perspectives and all of the communication that's going on. And I think that's one of our most valuable skill sets in this entire field, is that we can communicate, we can understand all these different perspectives and all the different techniques that we have access to.
Yes, I agree with everything that's being said. I also want to add that I really try hard to really listen to what they're trying to say and try not to bring in my biases or prejudices into onto the discussion, because I don't know, I think everybody's really into talking, but just having if I I just try really hard to listen and actually answer the questions that's being asked, because like what kind of like makes meetings fall apart sometimes is like we all ask one question, but then just this person just wants to talk like unrelated things endlessly, and that like nothing kills a good meeting like that person. So I may have been one of those at one point, but I'm like just trying to really listen and like do my best to answer the questions to move things forward.
We might have covered this a little bit in the couple previous questions, but in your opinion, what is the most promising future technology for our field? Like what can we implement into our field that's new?
Haptic technology is so cool. So not only is haptic technology cool for the idea of our patients being able to feel things in virtual reality. Let me back up. For any of you who do not know what the word haptics means, the idea is that it is adding a physical touch to the things that you're virtually experiencing. So like if you saw Ready Player One, for example, in virtual reality, the main character is also wearing like a haptic suit so that when he touches something, he feels it in his hands, right? It adds this unbelievable layer of immersion to what you're doing. Now, this is a huge breakthrough for surgical training, because you can have like different tissue feel differently when you're using these haptic devices. But even stepping away from what we can give to patients or clients, think about sculpting in ZBrush with your hands, feeling what you're actually working with, right? So I think that haptic technology is one of the coolest emerging technologies, but it also has really huge potential for us as creators and for the client.
I mean, I would love that. But yeah, I don't really have anything to add beyond what we've talked about.
Sure.
But I will. Okay, I do have one thing to add. I'm really excited to see how VR is becoming more accessible, and personal experience going to amusement parks and sitting on a roller coaster and wearing a VR headset. So it's becoming more accepted more universally, and the costs are going to go down just as 3D printing costs have come down. I think those VR headsets are going to come down, and hopefully tools for development will become more accessible as well.
So one thing I find is really cool is like the multilingual options on some things. Like that's something that I think about all the time, because I speak more than one language. It's like, oh, now you just like basically doubled your audience, and just like having that like as an accessible option, I think it's like really exciting. And also like if you make it like going back to that inclusion and diversity thing, like more people that are included, like everybody elevates up together. So I think like having that option and being like that inclusion, I think is really exciting, and I hope we keep moving forward. I hope, yeah.
That would be fantastic. All of those things sound amazing. And it kind of leads into our last question really nicely. The last question is, do you think that interactive spaces are a good replacement for real-world engagement in the medical field? And could you give a good example or a bad example of using like VR, AR stuff to teach medicine?
I think we're actually going to disagree. So I'm going to say that I really like touching things with my hands that are real. I think there's like definitely some value in that. And I know like the AI and the VR, they're getting really, really good. But like I don't know. Like, I'm sorry, I keep talking about birds, but like having that bird in your hand is such like a magical experience. And like that's like the best way to learn about them, is just like having that live little something in your hand, and like you're like hearing its like heartbeat, and because it probably thinks it's gonna die, but it's just that like connecting with like the natural world, I think is sometimes like a really valuable teacher. So like sometimes I like look at a VR, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get like motion sick, and yeah, so I don't know. So that's my thing. Like if you can like touch the real thing.
We actually don't disagree on this at all. I think that, right now, virtual reality is incredible. We're on the forefront of just amazing things, but it's not there yet. And if we just sort of lie to ourselves and say, oh, VR can replace anything, let's replace all cadaver dissections with VR stuff, we're not there yet. We can't pretend like we're there yet, right? But we're getting there, and it's super exciting. And what we can do is prepare ourselves to start creating technology that is going to get there eventually once the hardware gets there. Does that kind of make sense? But I do think that virtual reality has a really big place in not replacing what people have access to, but giving them access to something they don't have access to, right? So if someone can't do a cadaver dissection because they can't afford it necessarily, they can't afford school to go in and learn these things, but they just kind of want to get the experience. If it's a patient that definitely can't experience some sort of simulation that they want to be able to experience in advance, there are a lot of capabilities that VR has that can supplement things or create opportunities where there are none for a certain audience. But I do agree that right now, we can't just use VR as a replacement for real interaction. Yet. Maybe never, but
I agree. And I think we need to study it more. I mean, I think, as it develops, we need to study the efficacy and compare that against different modalities, because you're going to have learners that respond one way to a virtual world and another way to a physical world. So I think that's an area for exploration and taking up Mike's call on doing more evidence-based practice. And yeah.
All right, well, thank you guys so much for being here today and answering all of our questions. Let's just give a round of applause for our panelists here.